I'm Dan Langley, and this is the Manufacturing IT Podcast. In each episode, I speak with the key people of influence within smart manufacturing. In each conversation, we unpack and dissect all things Industry 4.0, from technology and trends to the ever-evolving digital manufacturing landscape. Let's get to it. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of the Manufacturing IT Podcast. I'm joined today by Adam Livesay. Adam Livesay is the founder of Elevat IoT. Adam, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. I'm really keen to kind of pick your brains today, understand a little bit more about your company. So maybe you could start with a bit of a background into the organization.
Sure. So we're an industrial IoT company that's focused on off-highway machinery. So we classify off-highway as anything outside the factory walls, right? So that can be everything with wheels and tracks, on-highway and off-highway, as well as things like stationary pumps and generators. Our typical customer is the OEM themselves, the folks that build the machines.
Yeah.
And we work with them to build solutions and services that they use internally and that they also release to their dealer networks, service teams, and ultimately end customers.
Yeah, and I was curious kind of why you created the business to focus outside of the factory rules. And, you know, a lot of the IoT companies I work with, speak to and see, everything's focused on connecting the machines inside the factory. Why did you kind of position the company outside?
Sure. So my previous life, I worked in industrial manufacturing and system integration. And a lot of our customers would build these big pieces of heavy machinery that would go in the field and do a lot of work. And these are basically like little factories themselves, right? And they're out there doing extremely important work for, infrastructure and construction, energy, you name it. These machines were getting more complex. They had more sensors and data, and that data could help drive different business operations for that company. Service, repair, maintenance, safety, you name it. We kept on getting a need from the customer base for a solution. We looked for the solution. We actually looked at in-factory solutions we could try to put outside the factory. We looked at traditional fleet management, telematics solutions we could put into it. And when we couldn't find it, after searching for about a year, trying to make these things work, we decided to build it. And there's this big trend that the big folks like Caterpillar and John Deere were already investing millions of dollars a year on their own solutions. And these smaller manufacturers didn't have an option. Okay. And so we looked at the opportunity and the need, and then went out there and started the company to help address those needs.
And how long have you been involved with the business? When was it founded, and kind of where are you up to?
Yeah, so we founded in 2017. So we're going into our 8th year of business. It was a internal skunk works project in my previous company, and then we rolled it out. So we had about 2 years of prototyping and proof of concepts and everything, and we rolled it out as a separate company. And we've just been building our partner network and our channel network and our OEMs over the last 8 years. And so it's in our industry, it's definitely long-term relationships. They're picking a technology partner, and it's a really exciting space to be in.
Yeah, and I think the IoT space has changed dramatically over the last kind of 10 years. I've been involved in the kind of space largely from a recruitment perspective in that last 10 years, and I've seen a big change in mentality when it comes to putting sensors and edge devices on machines or equipment or vehicles or whatever it might be to now, okay, we can get the data, but what do we do with that data? Who manages it? How do we conceptualize it? All that side of things. So there definitely seems to be a much more mature kind of marketplace on that front. How have you seen the landscape change, Adam, in the last kind of 8 years of the business?
So when we first started taking Elevate out to customers and we would talk about IoT, I swear people thought we said IOU. Like they had no idea what it meant, right? And so we had to really talk to them about it. Then there was hesitancy on connectivity. 3G was not quite as reliable as what we're seeing in the 4G. Rugged devices that could live on these big pieces of heavy machinery, data security, putting your data on a third-party cloud. All of this stuff was pretty new to the industry.
Yeah.
2020, the whole COVID era really helped for the manufacturers to adopt cloud service partnerships, API strategies, data strategies, security strategies. And that was a big acceleration, not to mention folks couldn't go and see their machines as easily as they could before. And so being able to get that remote connectivity and being able to connect to that machine when it's in the field became really important. So there was this massive kind of digital adoption, right? We up-leveled the industry because all of a sudden these large industrial companies that were running a lot of old school software and on-prem software were being forced to start working with third-party software, from Teams to Zoom to Slack to all this stuff. And they had to create this IT framework to allow other companies to work with them. So that really helped us out there. And then, I think 1.0 of IoT, like you're mentioning, was, PowerPoints and catchy phrases and science projects that didn't really turn to real value. Like IoT was the solution.
Yeah.
Now there's business cases, and IoT is part of the tech stack that's helping you drive that business case.
Yeah.
And then I see, lastly, companies are trying to provide the full solution. Now it's a lot more ecosystem partnerships that are working together to provide that solution. So that's been the biggest change.
Yeah, and I think that kind of digital maturity, different strategies for implementing technology, not just for the technology's sake, but the change management and deriving real business outcomes from using new tools, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes all the way back to how they're staffing, right? I mean, everyone from the enterprise obviously have the digital strategy officers, the VP of IoT, whatever that is internally. But, we're seeing the mid-market and the smaller companies putting IoT managers or telematic managers on staff. And so that HR, we all saw PowerPoints from Cisco and IBM and everything saying this was going to have to happen. Now we're seeing it actually happening, right? In practical use case, manufacturers out there putting in IoT managers. So that's been a big shift as well.
Yeah, and what's your role now, Adam, in the business? Kind of what is your focus?
Yeah, so my focus, so I lead the commercial side. Spent a lot of time on commercial strategy, partnerships, a lot of legal. So with those partnerships, there's a ton of contracts with data security, and when you deploy internationally, you have all these different security and GDPR laws, and then depending on if you're deploying to a municipality versus an OEM, and so I spent a lot of time there, a lot on the fundraising side, the investor relationship side as well. So that's it's been a shift for me because I used to be involved in when you start a company, the founders are typically involved in every sell, right? Every partnership, deeply in, and we have a phenomenal team that's joined in the last year plus, and these are A players from the industry that we've had relationships with, and they're doing a far better job than I ever did, and I'm farther away from it, right? So I'm getting updates on stuff, or maybe get pulled in at strategic things, and so that's been a shift, right? It's a kind of a mature shift as we go through this, but still spend a lot of time on the strategy side with that group.
And how big is Elevate at the moment in terms of company size, employees, and such?
Yeah, we're about 20 people. We're forecasted to grow maybe 15 or so this year.
Wow, okay.
So in the forecasted budget, so we're on a steady growth trajectory. So it's going to really determine on finding the right folks, bringing them on, how long does it take to onboard, and everything. So, yep.
Yeah, no, that sounds good. And this is kind of, this episode, it kind of fits into with our kind of software series at the moment, and a series about kind of connecting machines, connecting data. So I'm really kind of glad to have your kind of point of view, Adam. But maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the product and how you've kind of created the product. Is the product called Elevate, or has it got a different product name?
Yeah, we have different names inside there. We have, we call it Machine Connect, Elevate AZ, they're various solutions. But, Elevate as a whole, we're basically like your Fitbit for heavy machinery, right? So it's a good way to look at it.
Yeah.
The difference with us is we actually don't build the actual Fitbit itself. We partner with hardware companies that build it,
Sure.
and we have a number of different companies that we partner with, and we put our software on their devices. It's in there at the time of manufacturing, and it makes it really easy for our OEMs. Our focus was, get rid of the science project, make it very easy to connect your machine. It doesn't matter if you have 5 sensors or 300 sensors. Let's make it, super easy to get it connected, to configure it on the cloud, get data flowing, not having to worry about the communication of Wi-Fi, telco, satellite. We manage all that for you, and then really focus on the business side. So out of those 20 folks, 10 or 12 are on engineering, right?
Okay.
The other are on our sales team, our marketing, and our customer success. And, they spend a lot of time almost in a consultative role with our companies, because, we're driving to a connected machine strategy, but really a connected ecosystem strategy, right?
Yeah.
How are you going to share this data with your dealers, your suppliers, your end customers? What does that look like? What business case are you driving in? These are long-term partnerships, right? They're not signing up for, 1 year, set it and forget it. This is becoming, very critical about how they're operating their business moving forward. So we spent a lot of time in that partnership phase, and whatever we deliver in year 1 of production is going to evolve from there on out, right? It's going to be different in years 2, 3, 4, 5. So having that partnership with the OEM, understanding what their vision is, their strategy is, making sure that we're supplying our piece of the puzzle to help them hit that is key. So that's where we spend a ton of our time, actually. So the tech, we joke around that IoT is just a feature, right?
Yeah.
It's the business model and the strategy that's key.
And Adam, there'll be a lot of people listening to this episode that are on the kind of tactical side, in factories, outside of factories, people in the executive layer. Who would you say would be like the ideal kind of customer profile or person within a company that would get the most value, or would be thinking to look for a solution like Elevate?
For sure. So for us, one, you have to have the buy-in of, I would say, the executive team, right? It is strategic. Their company is going to go through this digital journey, this transformation, and moving this next phase of offering, digital services. And that could be the same services you offer today, just enhanced, right? A better service tool, a smarter aftermarket part strategy. So we have the executive team. Then we look at the heads of the service department, right? The heads of the sales team, the marketing team, the supply chain, and the engineering team. And when we look at those different use cases, I'll just give you a couple examples. These machines are getting more complex. They're getting smarter.
Yeah.
There's often some type of electrification that's happening, either electrified power systems on there or a full electric machine. There's something that's going on in that route, and they're a lot more difficult to service. At the same time, our industry has a lot of folks retiring out of the industry, so we're losing a lot of these very talented and knowledgeable service techs.
Yeah.
We're not getting enough people coming in, right? Yeah. So we're having this kind of perfect storm hitting. So we look at the service manager. We understand what information can we get from the machine back to their teams to help them diagnose, or maybe offer suggestions for those machines to be fixed if there's a downtime issue or a service issue. And then if you have to take a step further, how do you connect to those machines remotely? How can you start diagnosing that stuff? Or how do you push a software update? So we look at the service team. That goes back into the parts department, right? How can you get ahead of when certain components are on wear and tear, and that's impacting how that machine is actually producing its work, right? And we start to get ahead of that problem and capture those aftermarket parts and service contracts. And then our suppliers, what's really interesting in the supply department, they lose visibility of how many of their machines are actually on dealer lots out there. And so they just use us at a very simple data point, which is how many of my machines are sitting on dealer lots, what's my dealer floor plan look like, how is that going to impact positively or negatively my supply chain, my inventory, all that stuff. So it's, we equate it to kind of like when companies first plugged into the internet, they're always taking purchase orders. through fax or, through snail mail. And then all of a sudden they start getting it through email and they never look back, right? They start communicating through email. Well, when you start plugging your machines in, it's allowing you to run your same type of business functions just a lot more efficiently.
Yeah, real
right?
time.
More real time, yeah. So so for us, we really try to understand all the different value impacts across the organization, but then narrow down to what's the highest priority for that. Because we have companies that are super focused on service. We have companies that are super focused on aftermarket parts and service contracts. Where are they as a company? Warranty. And then we make sure we hit that product with them, knowing that we're eventually going to expand that out and get that data flowing to those other pieces of the organization.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting because, as you say, it's like inventing electric, right? Once one company have this visibility, this real time data, this real time kind of eyes on, it's impossible to managing running operations, service, maintenance departments without it. So, I guess from a kind of digital maturity perspective, what are some of the kind of things that the companies would need to have in place already to get the maximum use from a certain solution like yours?
Yeah, I think it starts with the HR aspect, right? Do they have an IoT manager or telematics
Yeah.
manager on staff? And then as a company, the larger the company gets, you probably have, VPs of products or strategies. They're all tied into this as well. But at least having that true IoT manager is a big piece because there's a lot of moving parts on there. And,
Literally.
literally. So yeah, so I think that's super key.
Fine.
I think the other piece is spending time in the forefront to ask those questions on what is the goals, right? How we're going to map out those business drivers, and then creating the correct IoT plan to get there,
Yeah.
right? There's a lot of things in that, everything from validating the tech, the contracts, the commercial agreements, to the business model, the deployment strategy, you name it, right? And a lot of these companies have never gone through a true IoT project that you have to get it to deploy. And then once it deploys, that's where the fun starts.
Yeah.
So that first year of production, now you're getting feedback. You're being able to actually push new features and software updates throughout the year. You have different engagement styles with your dealers and your end customers, and all that's new. It changes how a company runs.
Business
Does their
change
business.
management as well is a big part of it, right?
Huge, absolutely, and just making sure you're prepared for that, right? So, the companies that invest there, you see, outsized ROI, right? I mean, it ends up being major delta versus companies that are intertwining in everything else they're doing.
Yeah, and I think with the last kind of, I don't know, 15, 18 months, maybe with the kind of economic situation in the world and, companies being more cost sensitive than ever, I guess a solution like yours obviously comes with really obvious cost savings and a really easy way on a spreadsheet to evaluate whether there would be a measurable ROI that makes it worth it. So in one way, it would make sense. But has the market been harder for you the last 18 months, or has it been kind of easier to kind of get more companies purchasing and using your solution?
For us, it's been easier, for a number of reasons. One, just being able the cost savings of how to service a machine,
Yeah.
the increased revenue of the parts and service contracts. The big shift we've seen in the last 2 years is all of our direct customers are on multi-year contracts. They're 3 years, 5 years, and 10-year contracts
Wow.
because it's becoming so important about how they operate their business, right? And so, we're not selling a feature or nice to have to the OEM and hoping the end customer pays for the contract or renews it. If we're not driving the value to the OEM, then it's not a good fit for the OEM. It's not a good fit for us. Not a good fit for anyone. And you run across those scenarios, right? And that's okay because it could be in a specific application or industry or just OEM in general. But the cost of hardware is decreasing. The cost of connectivity is decreasing. And so with all of that in mind, the same system you get today is cheaper than it was 5 years ago, right?
Yeah.
It's cheaper than it was 3 years ago, and more reliable. So for us, it's there hasn't been a major headwind there,
Yeah.
right? And we really are making sure that we're measuring that value over and over again with the customer.
Yeah, and that's good to hear. And I guess, look, one of the things I was keen to do, and this is for the audience as well, is to maybe kind of ask you to talk through some of the kind of success stories that you've had, and maybe talking about some of the wins in terms of savings, percentages, or numbers. That would be a really interesting way for people to kind of quantify the benefit to a solution like yours.
Sure. I'll give you a couple use cases. So we have a forestry customer, and this forestry customer makes big wood chipping machines. Okay, and these wood chippers produce a wood chip, and the quality of that wood chip gets sold to plants for fuel, right? And so like paper mills and everything. Well, these are big machines, and they're kind of like these mobile factories, and they're looking at the same use cases we've talked about: warranty management, how do I service machines remotely, operator safety, you name it. They started to look at, hey, we have these big blades, and these blades are thousands of dollars, and those blades are the thing that creates the quality of that wood chip,
Okay.
right? And we know that if that blade dulls over time, the quality of that wood chip is going to diminish. So what we want to do is we want to monitor when that blade gets too dull, because when that wood chip drops below a certain yield of quality factor, the paper mills will reject it, right? Or they'll pay a lot less money for it. So we have all these sensors on the machine already used for control feedback loops and everything. We focused on the torque of the motor
Mm.
that was powering these blades. And when that went up over time, over a certain point, we knew that those blades were too dull. So with this particular customer, they were selling kits that were quality kits for their blades. Their aftermarket parts and service revenue, from the time we started working with them was 4% of total revenue. It's now north of 10%
Wow.
of total revenue. It highlighted a lot of other service opportunities that weren't necessarily tied to IoT, but IoT shed light on it all,
Wow.
right? So they've really changed into a nice service strategy. The other really kind of cool thing about that is majority of that revenue used to be done um, outside sales folks calling their dealers, calling their operators, working in it, doing the milk route. Over 50% of their service revenue is now done through their online e-parts store,
Yeah. Wow.
right?
That's
It's
amazing.
massive, right? And so, we have a number of applications that are on those same trajectories.
Mm.
And what we found is most of their OEMs out there, best in class, is trying to get 10% of parts and service revenue as of total revenue. And so we spend time with them building that strategy out. And it's a crawl, walk, run,
Mm.
because you got to determine, like, you're going to do an IoT deployment. Are you going to revamp your entire, online parts store? Maybe not in year one, but maybe by year three.
Yeah.
But just the visibility to your sales team, they can be proactive on those calls rather than reactive, waiting for the customer to call them to change their blades. We have a press release coming out next week on Monday with a company that builds street sweepers. And, they build these street sweepers, sell them all over North America. And they have the same maintenance problem and downtime problem, repair problem. And now they're getting a lot of information from Elevate on reducing the call time, upwards of 50% to be able to get those fixed. But another wear and tear application is they're looking at the force that's pressing down on the brushes of those street sweepers, and being able to determine that when those brushes are force is too high, they're not getting enough work done, right? The brushes have diminished, and
Mm.
they're not cleaning the streets or the parking lots as well as they need to. So then being able to provide that information to their dealers and the end customers to a capture that aftermarket part and service business, but ultimately provide a better quality to the end customer on the contracts they're cleaning. So those are some use cases out there. This is where we look at. We really dial into it. We understand. We try to understand where they can pick up the revenue, what they're losing out there, how is it impacting the quality of their product to the end customer, what's their service times. We have an application right now, and it's not a partnership. It's not validated yet. I would say we're going to validate it in a few years. But this customer, the average downtime in North America for their machines are 8 days,
Wow.
and the goal here, and we're deployed on hundreds of units now with them, and we're going to grow it over the next few years, is, can we reduce that, right? Can we take that from 8 days to 4 days? And so if we can help reduce that from 8 days to 4 days on recommendations of fixes for the machine, remote troubleshooting, up parts, getting the right service tech out there, that's a massive win for their end customer.
Yeah.
There's actually no revenue tied to this, right? They don't have a revenue goal. They have a customer satisfaction goal. They have a market share protection goal rather than an increased revenue goal. And so for us, that's going to be a big win if we can validate. And we think it's a realistic goal. They think it's a realistic goal of just being able to provide that information in a more intelligent way. They have years of service records. They have the real-time data coming from the machine. They can take that real-time data, match it against the service records, tell you the model of the machine you're using, and then give you the recommendation back out. And so that's going to be, I think that's going to be the next phase of IoT, is a lot of companies taking historical data they have, taking the real machine, going against it, layering in, some language models, larger language models, right, out there to make the recommendations with their data set. So this is going to be an exciting project that we're going to be monitoring closely.
Yeah, I mean, tons to unpack there, Adam. I guess the standout figure for me that kind of is kind of mind blowing is the 6 percentage points increase at the wood chipper in terms of top line revenue growth across the service industry. I mean, it's phenomenal. I guess when you can demonstrate that, that's like showing a caveman fire and asking him if he wants it, right? I mean, that's like phenomenal.
Yeah, and what happens is the organization ends up investing heavier in their digital strategy, right?
Yeah.
Now their e-commerce store now is so much more robust than it was when we started with them, and they use an outfit that does this and the whole deal. But their end customer can go in and see everything about their machine, all their user manuals, their parts. They have a connection into the actual inventory on the shelf or supply chain. So now they've seen how valuable this is to their customer and how valuable it is to them. And they've completely changed their whole digital footprint to what was when they built these machines originally, they made those blades disposable because if a machine was in Chile, they didn't want to send a service tech to go replace that machine. They wanted to be able to go buy the blades from a competitor if they need to. So now it's changed that whole customer framework market. And again, we're seeing this everywhere, and that has been one of the more exciting companies to work with because they are so digital forward on the e-commerce side that we think a lot of other companies are going to follow suit into something like that over the coming years.
Yeah, and companies have to be more aware about increasing revenue streams and routes to market. So increasing service revenue is a big one. Maintenance one obviously is a big one as well. But it's also just, from a sustainability and green pledges and stuff like that, companies are going to be way more focused on that kind of sustainability piece, which maybe is kind of less quantifiable than financial gain, but obviously kind of aligning with kind of corporate strategies as well, right?
100%. And so, when we look at when our customers work with us on this piece, right, the first thing they start to get real visibility in is how much idle time they have, right? Or how much time the machine's running, but not doing work, right? So a street sweeper could be running around the city of Florida or the state of Florida, all day. But if that brush is not actually down doing work, how much fuel are you wasting, right? They get a real look. And so when you're talking about reducing carbon footprints, when you start talking about this sustainability that also matches up with the cost of operations, that's a win-win for these organizations. We have a number of customers that are working with us right now on Scope 3 emission strategies. And the Scope 3 emission strategies, is not just what your machines produce for a carbon footprint, but what they produce for other people inside other people's supply chain.
Wow. Okay.
Right.
Wow.
So being able to understand that, and we're at the very beginning stages with companies on that, but they know that right now they do estimates, right? They do estimates on work use and utilization, and they can start getting that data and be able to monitor that actual carbon, right? Then they can get a real good idea. So if Microsoft decides to go build a building, and Microsoft says what's going to be, the carbon footprint of that building, and that contractor has to start looking at things like what type of cement am I using, who's the supplier, transporter, that all that stuff. Our companies that build the cement trucks or build the mixers want to be able to provide that data and just say, hey, this is exactly what our impact is. So that's a huge piece coming in, and then the electrification piece, is a big
Autonomous vehicles as well, and yeah,
autonomous vehicles, electrification. It's a big push in our industry right now too. There's regulation in California and New York that's pulling that up, um, and and so I think you're going to see that technology is improving, is rapidly improving over the last 5 years. I think 5 years from now it's going to be great. I'm seeing a lot of very viable use cases around it, and turf, street sweeping is another one.
mm,
A lot of stuff that our municipality sells into municipalities, because in municipality, their ultimate customer are the residents,
yeah,
right? So if I have an electric street sweeper, that's better for my residents in the condos because they don't hear it at 3 in the morning versus a gas powered one. We have a
yeah,
customer that builds, turf equipment that gets sold into golf courses. And if I live on a golf course and someone's going to roll the greens at 4:45 in the morning, electric green roller is a lot better than a
yeah,
gas powered roller, right? So
yeah.
we're
Amen.
seeing that piece come out as well.
Yeah, and look, I guess that from my side, there's a real obvious kind of use case to this inside factory walls and stuff like that. Is that something that's on the horizon for you guys, or are you kind of keen to stay where you are and kind of solidify that side of the market, or is kind of moving inside factory walls, on the roadmap?
We will move inside factory walls on what we would consider like discrete IoT. So pumps, generators, motors, presses.
Mm,
We're not going to get inside automation systems and SCADA systems and
mm,
process systems, just because this is the market that we're in right now is so underserved,
yeah,
right? It's got so much growth towards it, and it's not what we say yes to; it's what we say no to. And so we get pulled. We've had a lot of companies that have tried to pull us inside the factory, and we've stayed very good at staying outside of it, unless it's those stationary equipment,
yeah,
because often power unit or a pump or a generator isn't necessarily plugged into everything else, and it's not really connected. And so we do have a lot of companies that will put us inside factory walls for that aspect, but
yeah.
we're not building automation systems and industrial IoT systems out there, right?
Okay.
We are a small puzzle piece to the larger puzzle they're building, and then
Yes.
we'll just share the data with them.
No, that makes sense. And look, we're almost out of time, Adam, but I just wanted to ask you on the kind of recruitment efforts. You mentioned obviously you've grown the business now, you've got top people in that are, exceeding your, as you say, modest modesty
Yeah.
on that front. But kind of maybe for other people that are maybe earlier in their journey to founding a business and kind of less advanced than where you guys are, what are some of the kind of recruitment tips that you could share? What's some of your kind of wisdom on that front, Adam?
Yeah. So for us, when we started early on, it came down to rising stars or A players, right? Finding rising stars and A players, finding people that were really good humans, right? And so you got to really, really like the people you're working with, and the whole deal, and then hiring for people that are not like you,
Yeah,
right? Often,
that's a hard one.
often we yeah, often we want to like hire
Yeah,
people that we friends with or whatever. I'm not saying you can't be friends with them, but you want to hire people that have different skill
complimentary.
sets and
Yeah,
complementary, and strengthen where we as you start to scale, where we spend a lot of time on is when we go out there to define the next role that we like, we spend a huge amount of time on defining that role, the characteristics, what the exact expectations are. And what that does is it allows us to examine really what's that need that we need, right? Often we think it's one role, it turns out to be something different. And then when we go to recruit for this, those folks are very, very clear on what the role is and what the expectation is. And that's been a process that we've implemented in the last 12 months, and it's worked out really well. It really helps us uh, all understand and agree with what who we're hiring, what we're hiring for, and what we expect this individual to contribute.
yeah, and I think there's some really good bits there as well. But look, I think this has been a really strong episode, Adam, and tons of value for the audience. And I think one of the key parts of the software series and inviting you on is that it's just such a different perspective to what a lot of other companies are doing. And as I say, that area that you're solving, a small puzzle piece within a big jigsaw, I think it's just a really interesting space. The use cases are phenomenal, the ROI is phenomenal. So yeah, really glad and appreciative of your time. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me on.
Well, that's it for another episode. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed the conversation and are a little bit more knowledgeable after the episode. If you're a fan of the show, please like, share and subscribe with your colleagues and friends. And if you'd like to be a guest on a future episode, just drop me a note on LinkedIn. See you next time.